everybody. I just finished reading Expiration Dates and I'm going to do a little bit of a review. Now, this is my very first review ever, but I come prepared. I have a whole outline of everything that we're going to discuss. So let's give you a little table of contents of what we're going to go over. We're going to talk about just my experience reading it, my thoughts on it based off of being a writer myself. Now, when I say I'm a writer, I don't mean that I have books published. I just took a lot of creative writing classes in school, and I continue to write, and I do want to write a book one day, so I'm always reading from that perspective of both the reader and the writer. Then the plot and predictability, the surprises, the emotional impact, the tropes, and my final thoughts. Then at the end, I'm going to do a little bit of a rant on my official thoughts of the book. This is going to be a spoiler section, so I'll give you plenty of time to pause, like the video, and come back once you've read the book. But don't worry, there won't be any spoilers up until that point. So let's get into it. My estimated time for you to read this book is between 4 and 6 hours. It took me roughly 5. I did read it in 3 sittings in 3 days. So over the course of 3 days, I sat down 3 times and read this book. So it was a little bit of a binge read, but not a sit down in one sitting read. So I'm going to go through a couple different sections that are definitely going to be influenced by my perspective as a writer. So they're still overall part of the review, but I do want to preface that I might be a little bit more judgmental than most people, and that's why it's going to be part of this writer brain section. So for character believability, I'm giving this a 3 out of 5. Personally, I felt like the characters were very believable and well written in the writing world, but I could not imagine taking them out of a book and seeing them in real life. They just didn't feel that believable. So 3 out of 5. It wasn't completely ridiculous, but it wasn't super strong either. Now, conflict believability. This is where I'm going to give the book a 5 out of 5. And my reason for this is because when the conflicts arose, I not only felt like they were real, but I also felt like I didn't have the answer. I couldn't see a conversation fixing it, and I couldn't imagine where the story was going to go to fix it. So, loved that, 5 out of 5. Now, another thing I wanted to mention, did I feel aware of the writing while I was reading? My answer for this is absolutely yes, nearly every single chapter. When this happens, I feel like it's this lack of proper editing or going back, because when I'm writing personally, I get into a little bit of a flow state and I'll write things like, this isn't what I mean, but it kind of conveys it. And my point when I do that is to go back and spend the 10 minutes or 20 minutes, however long it takes, to find the right way to say it that really drives the point home. And it felt like instead of doing that, she literally wrote, that isn't the right word, but there isn't a word to describe it, is there? And it's like, no, if you gave it enough time, you would probably figure it out. So I didn't like that. Okay, so this next part, I wanted to give you a small highlighted portion that stood out to me as a writer. And this isn't necessarily a spoiler, but I will tell you where to skip in the video in case you don't want to hear it, so you can do that now. But I will talk a little bit about why I highlighted it and what I thought of it. So my highlighted portion. If you never stop long enough to sink into something, then it can't destroy you. It's easier to climb out of a pool than a well, is the thing. So that little snippet, I highlighted it because I love it. Taking it completely out of the book, I love this writing, I love this concept, I love the metaphorical imagery, I love it. But there was a few different sections like this that I have highlighted, and I felt like Rebecca was using these little moments to create all of this emotion and context in the story instead of showing it to us and letting us feel the emotion, and it kind of felt almost like cheating. Now, I have mixed emotions about it because I loved reading those sections, so I can't completely hate on them, but I do feel like it was a little bit of a cop-out, I guess, when you're writing. So those are my thoughts on that. So now we're going to talk about plot and predictability, surprises, emotional impact. Those are all kind of going to lead into one another. So let's get into it. So the overall predictability of the story, I am going to rate it a 4 out of 5. Now, the reason for a 4 out of 5 is because I saw the ending coming less than halfway through the book. I felt like I knew what the ending was going to be, and I just didn't know how we were going to get there. So that knocked off a point. Other than that, I didn't feel like this book was predictable at all. I felt like I was consistently surprised. I was consistently receiving new information. Overall, pretty unpredictable. So 4 out of 5. Okay, so now kind of leading from that into surprises. Did this story massively surprise me? No. But were there surprises? Absolutely yes. Honestly, there was more surprises than I can even count, but I would say roughly in the realm of like 4 to 5. Now, my big problem with this is that the surprises did not start until halfway through the book. So it felt like I was a little bit out of context for half of the book, just reading a mediocre story, and then once we got about halfway through, everything started making sense and everything was written through that context. And I didn't love that, but I also didn't hate that. But if I'm going to rate the surprise impact of this book, I'm going to rate it a 4 out of 5 because I was able to consistently feel surprised by the book. I didn't feel like I knew what was going to happen in the next chapter, every single chapter. Okay, emotional impact. My first just really quick yes or no. Did I cry? Yes. But these tears were solely based off of my personal experience and how much I related to this specific scene that was depicted, and it was never empathetic. So on emotional connection, I'm going to give this book a 3. I didn't feel like there was no emotional connection, but I did feel like it was severely lacking to the point that it kind of made it hard for me to see the story progress and even have a desired ending. Okay, for the tropes, I am going to tell you the top 3 tropes and how I felt like they kind of worked in this book. So the first one is magical realism, then friends to lovers, and second chance romance. So first, magical realism. Obviously, that's like the entire concept of this book. It's all about the main character, Daphne, knowing how long relationships are going to last based off of these little papers that just appear to her. But ultimately, this wasn't like a key portion of the story. Like, you couldn't write the story without it, but it wasn't a magical book in any way, and I really did enjoy that. It very much kept things in real life, and it was just this very small premise that allowed her to write the rest of it. Friends to lovers and second chance romance. These are both tied together in this story. I think ultimately, when you're looking at these tropes, you as the reader get to decide which one it is. For me, it was a second chance romance because that is what I'm emotionally connected to. But if you're really emotionally connected to a friends to lovers trope, you're going to see that way stronger. So when it comes to tropes, I'm going to give her a 5 out of 5. They never felt too in my face, and it felt like I got to decide what the leading trope within this book was. Final thoughts time. So my overall rating for this book is a 4 out of 5. The reason that I'm giving this book a 4 out of 5 is because I really did enjoy reading it. And if I am looking for a book that I simply want to read as entertainment, I'm here for this book, absolutely. But this wasn't the type of book that I felt like I had a profound experience reading or a profound takeaway after reading, and that is what makes a book a 5 out of 5 for me. Something that I would want to read again because the emotion and the impact that the book had on me was so strong. I just didn't have that, so it's a 4 out of 5 for me. Okay, now I would like to compare this book to a few other Rebecca Serle books that I have read. I have read in this order: One Italian Summer, In 5 Years, and now Expiration Dates. And if I were to rate these in a list, it would be exactly in that order. The reason that I enjoyed One Italian Summer was for the imagery. I felt like I was really immersed in the world that she had created in that book, and I loved it. And then when I read In 5 Years, I really enjoyed that book for the concept. I wasn't in love with the writing, I wasn't in love with the setting, but I really enjoyed the concept, and that's what kept me going, but I didn't like the ending. It felt rushed. Now, when I read Expiration Dates, I felt like there was moments where the scene building was incredibly strong, and I loved it for that, and there was moments where the general concept of the plot was really strong, and I loved it for that, but the ending was very middle of the road. I liked it more than when I read In 5 Years, but honestly less than even the ending in One Italian Summer. So this book ends up at the bottom because there wasn't anything that was truly strong that would bring me back to reread it. Okay, so this is the end of the spoiler-free review. So everything beyond this point is basically my ramblings. If we were sitting here and we had both read the book, this is what I would be telling you. So if you don't want to hear any of that, please stop the video now, give it a like, come back once you've read it, and please tell me what you thought of the book. Write in the comments. Agree with me, disagree with me, let me know. But beyond this point is my thoughts, spoilers, all of that fun stuff. I have a few core complaints about this book. My first one is the timeline. I felt like with all of the skipping around from chapter to chapter to explain the different relationships, I could not follow the timeline. It felt like I was doing mental math in my head to figure out when things were happening and how they correlated to the rest of the story, and I didn't like that. I understood why she did it, why she broke it up into relationships, and why she laid it out in the way that she did, and I did feel like without that layout, it might have been hard to have the surprise aspect or like the unexpected events really laid out. But overall, it just made it harder. It made it hard to know exactly what was happening. And maybe if there had been more of a conversational flow going into those, maybe that would have been better. I don't know, but it just wasn't my favorite. My next core complaint is Jake as a character. I felt like Jake could have been the one that she was supposed to end up with. Like the entire story could have been Hugo left the note without the time frame, and this was her breaking out of her shell and not letting those notes define her and instead falling in love with the perfect guy. But instead, Serle kind of wrote Jake as like this perfect guy that's missing the love aspect, which honestly, super relatable, especially at this point in my life, and I enjoyed that. But it wasn't how I would have wanted the story to go as a reader without my own emotional context. I didn't like that. I felt like Jake could have been the perfect guy. Now, leading from that, Hugo. I didn't like him. I didn't like him at any point in the story until like the very last quarter, maybe, when he sits down with Daphne and she was having that conversation about whether or not she should be with Jake, and Hugo was basically like, I'm not giving you an excuse. That was the first moment in time where I liked him as a character. Other than that, I was reading him as this past relationship, and oh my gosh, I'm so excited that we're seeing a book where the main character has a friend that's a guy that she had dated in the past, and then that just all kind of fell apart at the end. I don't know, I didn't like that. I was expecting this to happen for the majority of the book, especially once we found out how he showed up at the house after she was at the hospital and asked her what was going on and was worried about her and her family. At that point, I was like, she's going to end up with Hugo, but I don't want that to happen. And I guess my other problem with that, kind of leading back into Jake, is that Jake did all of that better. He did all of that better, but there was these core moments where he wasn't the right guy. I especially didn't like Jake when he asked her to move in with him after only a few months of dating. It felt ridiculous to me. It didn't feel like who Jake was as a person or why we were trying to like Jake. And I guess at the end, we weren't supposed to like Jake, so maybe it works out. But while I was reading, I was like, why is he doing this? He was supposed to be this guy that supported her and saw her as independent and admired her, and why is he trying to get her to move in so quickly? It just felt rushed and wrong, and there wasn't enough emotional drive happening, I guess. I don't know. Another key complaint for me was the relationship with her boss and coworker at all. I feel like those conversations and scenes were only there to build context and create like the thoughts of Daphne, and that's great. But at the very end of the book, when she sits down with her dad and has a conversation, it was so much stronger. And I feel like if we had taken out that work life portion entirely and we had just worked on the relationship with the parents and going through all of these emotional trials with the parents, maybe there's different conversations happening with each of them, you know? Maybe she talks about the notes with her mom but doesn't with her dad, and I don't know. I just feel like we could have had a stronger story if we had cut out those characters and instead added those scenes into her parents, because again, this book was lacking emotional connection, and I think it was because there was too many people. So I guess like my core takeaway from reading this book was it's a great story. There is great information here, great concepts, great thoughts, but I was reading a rough draft. It could have been so much stronger. It could have had so much more emotional connection. It could have had so many scenes and dialogues that just tied it all together, and I was bummed. I don't know. So those are my final thoughts. I'd love to hear your agreements, disagreements, all of it in the comments. And let me know what you thought of the other two books too. If you've happened to read all three of these, where do they rank for you? I'd love to know. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed.